Good afternoon, everyone. My pleasure to be here again. I've been on stage a few times, and it's been my first trip to Ireland. I love Bitcoin conferences. I want to congratulate everybody on still being here. As the first thing I say, I think with Bitcoin, in my mind, we're talking about an idea that is going to be exciting for 1,000 years, and for an individual person to experience persistent and sustained excitement over something that it will extend well beyond our natural human lifespan is a difficult thing to think about, and it's part of the reason why there may be less people here than there were last year when the price was twice as what it is right now. So the exercise of Bitcoin for me has a lot to do with time. I have been thinking about this for years, and my journey with this started with an article. I always like to credit a great Bitcoin thinker, Dedels, wrote an article, I think in 2020, called Bitcoin It's Time. I was new to studying Bitcoin then, and it was, for me, the first thing that really exposed me to conversations that were happening about Bitcoin that weren't related to Bitcoin being money. And it was just the fact that those conversations were happening that really got my head spinning and captured my imagination and made me realize that in addition to Bitcoin being this transformational innovation and incredibly durable technology, it's also a really big idea that we're only starting to scratch the surface in our understanding of. And so personally, I believe there is no one today who understands Bitcoin. I think what we think of as the idea of Bitcoin will be very different in 50 years and in 500 years when all of us are long gone. And we're even sort of seeing that early on now, because some of the conversations you would have seen different, what is the most interesting thing happening in Bitcoin right now? Well, it's very different than what the answer would have been 2 years ago. So Bitcoin is continually evolving. It's designed to change, and it's designed to be understood progressively. So I think that one of the frustrations that people have with the Bitcoin price, why isn't everyone orange-pilled? Why aren't we hyper-Bitcoinized already? Is because I believe that at a civilization level, the human collective consciousness is absorbing the notion of Bitcoin as quickly as is possible. It's a very big idea that we need to distribute across billions of people. And 15 years is not very much time to do that. So, I think that Bitcoin, 99% of the conversations that happen around Bitcoin revolve around its use as money. And I like to encourage Bitcoiners to continue the journey, because I feel that money is just the most obvious application for this incredible technology. And it's because, in part, the problem of money is easier to understand, it's more obvious, and it impacts us, all of us progressively as money gets worse and worse at fulfilling its intended purpose. So what is money for? Money is a coordination mechanism. It's a tool that we designed to solve a problem and then scale the solution of that problem. And this came up actually yesterday. The original problem was something that in economics is called the coincidence of wants. And the coincidence of wants is the level to which you can scale a barter economy before you start running out of the trade pairs, where the person who has the thing you want wants the thing that you have. And now we need something to function in between. Civilization is a collection of coordination problems. And this is the beautiful thing about civilization, is humanity over thousands of years has developed this really cool ability to come together and problem solve and figure out how to do things better and differently. And once we have settled on something, we move on to solving a different problem. And this is how we see this continual evolution of technology, and arrive at a place where we are now, or we're streaming video on handheld devices and talking about magic internet money. So money was a coordination problem. We needed to develop some system that would enable goods and services to be valued and exchanged, and to scale that across time and space. And time is also a coordination problem. It is a civilization, it's a very important civilization problem. And this is why I think it's interesting, and it's also why I think Bitcoin is a very thought-provoking idea as a time technology. So what do I mean by this? The same way that we needed a medium to scale the complexity of economies, we needed before that a medium to come to the agreement around when things are going to happen, which really is what clocks actually do. Clocks help us in a very simple way understand, without having to really think about it, when something is going to happen, when something already did happen. It allows us to plan, and it allows us to agree on like when things happened in the past. And before we had mechanical clocks, we'd been thinking about solving this problem for a long time, because there were other kind of clocks that predated machines. You know, before machines, we were forced to use timekeeping devices that sort of harnessed what was available to us in the natural world. So sundials, hourglasses, water clocks, and they were typically things that had the limitation of a shared physical geography. So if everyone was having to depend on the sun or the time to figure out the time of the day, then the extent at which coordination could be scaled under that system would be everybody paying attention to the same sun. So this is why, like thousands of years ago, humanity was doing incredible stuff, but it was all in one place. So the pyramids at Giza, you know, they're built by people that were sharing a shared locality, a shared geography. And it was in 1657 when a massive innovation came in mechanical timekeeping with the invention of the pendulum. And I like to talk about the pendulum as sort of like the money study of Bitcoin. People always want to talk about 1971. 1971 was when Richard Nixon temporarily permanently, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government measure, ended the redemption of gold from the US Federal Reserve. So that was a moment that forever changed the trajectory of how money works. And we talk about 1971 all the time. A more under-examined, but I think equally important moment was the invention of the pendulum, because it started changing the way that we think about time. And the thing that's wild about time is it's been going on for so much longer, like hundreds of years longer than the money thing, that we've actually, for the most part, stopped examining whether it makes sense at all. So what happened when we started having clocks that could measure minutes? So minutes were a completely new thing. And prior to the invention of the pendulum, time would have been a lot more, based on what the sundial was capable of measuring, right? So it would have been a lot less discrete and a lot less exact. And we then had access to smaller units of time, which enabled us to treat those units of time as something that we could buy and sell and loan. Time became a commodity, which is a really significant thing, because hundreds of years later, our entire world, everything around us and how all of this stuff works, is built on exact time. All of the logistics that enable groceries to arrive at our stores, all of this is coordinated based on mechanical timekeeping. And it's totally made up, which is the weirdest thing about it. So before that would have happened, people would have just had a different way of thinking about time. And after it happened, we lost the ability to think in that way. And the evidence that we lost the ability to think in that way is actually all around us. And this is partly why I love traveling. It's also why I love Bitcoin. We stopped building things that take 300 years to build when we started measuring minutes, because something in our consciousness about how we coordinate changed. And that change then produced a transformation in how we think about building civilization. So if I started a company today and told everyone that I was going to start a building that I was going to hope to have done by 2400, everyone would think I was completely insane. Like, we've just lost the ability to think that way. And I'm not suggesting that we need to be building things that take hundreds of years to be great. But what I do think is fair to say is that the buildings are a bit of a smoking gun in a trend that started hundreds of years ago that is categorized by a diminishing ability for us to think in long duration, which is, to me, the problem that is bigger than the money problem, because this is something that affects our politics very deeply. When we start thinking in shorter and shorter time horizons, we start making shorter and shorter time horizon decisions. And this is how Bitcoiners think about lowering their time preference, right? So when you're making a personal individual choice as a result of your understanding Bitcoin to defer a discretionary purchase, what you're actually doing, to me, is touching that muscle that's gotten really weak over the last 20 or 50 or 100 years as we've progressively moved everything in civilization to instant gratification. Everything, and that problem is getting more and more pronounced as technology and AI become more powerful and advanced. You know, it's not that long ago where phones were just phones. You know, like where cell phones, all of a sudden everybody had one, but all you could do on it was call or send a text message. And now, the purpose of a phone is to alert you to all of the things that you need to be paying attention to instead of the things that you're doing instead, right? That's a new thing. And in a very short amount of time, we've all sort of become slaves to notifications. And these things, you know, the time thing, it's always well-meaning, it's well-intended. So centralization of money was a really important invention for the early 20th century to enable the creation of a real global market and allow us to move capital in a new way. And the trade-off, you know, in systems design, there's always trade-offs. And the trade-off of that system is that we had to let somebody tell us what money is, and with that power came their ability to change the value of that money by endlessly creating more of it. It's a pretty big sacrifice to make. Hopefully we're moving through that to something else. We did the same thing with clocks, and we've taken it to a very far extent today because almost everybody in this room, raise your hand if you get your time now from either Apple or Samsung. Just about everybody, right? So time has become this incredibly centralized thing. So the elegance of Bitcoin's architecture, in addition to being a monetary system, the first problem that Satoshi was addressing to solve was something called the double spend problem. If you read the white paper, that is actually a problem of time, because figuring out a way to prevent counterfeiting with Bitcoin is figuring out how to get everybody who's participating in the network to agree on the order that things happen. And that is the most important aspect of preventing me from spending my money again before I've given you the money and you have a chance to keep it or do something else with it. So Bitcoin's inherent nature as a technology is giving civilization a tool so that without any referee in the middle, we can agree when things happen. And it also does this in a rhythm. It does it every roughly 10 minutes, and there's a really incredible mechanism inside Bitcoin's timing mechanism called the difficulty adjustment, where every roughly 2 weeks, the system does a self-diagnostic and determines whether or not the last 2 weeks was hitting that roughly 10-minute mark, and it will auto-adjust to make sure that Bitcoin is perfectly staying on time. So the mechanical timekeeping and the time that we get from Apple and Samsung, the minutes, units never change, but the value of those units is always changing. And that's, I think, part of the crazy output of why the world looks the way it does, is because we're trying to take this one thing, time, that how it's partitioned never changes. And we're trying to determine what that time is worth. And we have to do that with a tool where we have no idea what money is worth. And money is worth a lot less than it was 5 years ago everywhere, but depending on where you are, it could be worth less, or more, less. And I mean, that's how crazy it is. So Bitcoin's clock actually expresses more information than the clocks we use now. And I'm not suggesting that we're gonna ever probably get to a place in civilization where we no longer use minutes as a tool. We need small units of time for exact coordination. But what Bitcoin's clock does do that regular clocks don't is connect value and time into a single unified expression. And it does this because every block, roughly every 10 minutes, has this fixed amount of Bitcoin attached to it. So I think we're actually moving to a place where we're going to be able to describe time differently because we can describe time and value in a single number. And that is so alien to how we think about what we use time for now. It's almost as different as how we think about Bitcoin compared to how we think about fiat money, because you can't really use fiat money for anything other than spending, because holding it is an insane way to think about what you're meant to do with money. Bitcoin, we're just starting to scratch the surface of how we can use it as money. And ultimately, I think Bitcoin's adoption as money has the potential to force us to adopt it as other things. So what do I mean by it produces a different way of thinking? I think that it's very fair and true to say that when people start to really deeply understand Bitcoin, they change how they act. They change how they spend, they change how they plan for the future, they change how they think about financial, everything. You may change the vacations you take, the friends you keep, and that behavior tends to want those people to talk to other people who have the same ideas. And that as that number grows, you move from individual people making certain choices to all of a sudden, now you have a small city, you may have a country, you may have humanity. And why I think this is interesting is because the adoption of mechanical timekeeping 400 years ago tells us that it's already possible for humanity to adopt a different way of thinking about time. We've already done it once. And I said this earlier on the panel today, if you don't think that Bitcoin's gonna hit $1 million, like ever, you should pack up and sell your Bitcoin and move on to something else. Because it's just part of how Bitcoin works, that this thing is, nothing is impossible, but it's incredibly high likelihood of happening. What is unknown is the time, is how long it's gonna take. But most people who believe in Bitcoin believe that a complete fundamental change in what we think of as money is possible. We believe one thing, and now in the future we'll do something else. And so I believe that this is what we will also end up doing with time. When enough people in the world really understand Bitcoin, we can start thinking about governing ourselves and organizing ourselves and coordinating in a much different way. And that's what the book is about. I think, yeah. So I'm gonna stop there. I think I'm out of time. If you're interested to learn a bit more, I've got a website out called attheageoftime.com, and I am selling books in the book at the book table. And like I said, ultimately, it's an exploration of what Bitcoin can be beyond money. If you're interested in that topic, I'd love to talk to you more about it. Thank you.